something quite important that we are going to be listening to today. And Prof Bruton has allowed us to arrange this webinar and to invite people onto this platform. Guess who received a PhD from Rhodes University in 1977? Guess who, during his research career, specialized in studies on fisheries and aquatic ecology and conservation? Guess who took a keen interest in nature, in the nature and creativity of sciences and innovation in technology? Guess who in retirement has written a number of books and given many talks on topics covered by those books? Guess who has received many awards for his contribution to science and science communication? And guess who received a lifetime award from the NSTF in 2001? Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Prof Bruton, who is going to be speaking to us this morning. The interesting thing about Prof Bruton is that last year we had a very intense conversation where we invited Dr. Mawela to talk about the role of language in the fourth industrial revolution. Prof Bruton listened intently, and in one of the commentaries, he said, is it the fourth industrial revolution or is it the first post-industrial revolution? And we thought, wow, that sounds so interesting. Perhaps it would be a good idea to invite him to come along and join us.
Tsepo, your
his
sound.
Thoughts on this. I am also welcoming everybody who. Now, let me allow Susan Veldsman, the Director of Scholarly Publishing, to say a few words. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you so much, Tsepo, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I was just actually wanted to suggest you perhaps put off your video because you have a little bit of a bandwidth problem there, but we seem to be all right. And thank you very much for changing over to me. So I'm so looking forward to this actual meeting this morning. I just want to mention, looking at who has joined this morning, we are far and wide. There are some colleagues from Africa. There's some sister organizations like SASTA. There's one or two high schools that have also linked into this webinar. There are reps from universities, some ASSAf staff, and then, of course, our distinguished guest, Professor Bruton. Thank you very much, Prof, for agreeing to join us this morning. I want to take my lead from Tsepo, who says, guess who? So guess who? Who is ASSAf? Because I think we normally just jump right into the matter and we do not pay a little bit of attention as to who are we. Who is ASSAf? So we were inaugurated in May 1996. And the mandate of the Academy encompasses all fields of scientific inquiry. And I think that's very important. We're not just the hard sciences as such, it's all fields of scientific inquiry. And it includes the full diversity of South Africa's distinguished scientists. So ASSAf is the official National Academy of Science of South Africa and represents the country in the international community of science academies. We are funded by the Department of Science and Innovation. I think what is very important is to note that in our 5-year strategic plan, ASSAf proposed to operationalize its activities around 6 strategic objectives that are outcome and output driven. So the first outcome is then independent, authoritative, and influential scientific advice. Our second outcome, and this is very important for this morning, is science engagement. The third one is mobilizing knowledge, and the fourth one is facilitating partnerships. The fifth one, scholarly support, and the sixth one, supporting transformation. So it's also then in this regard that we would like to deliver effective science engagement and communication to all stakeholders, to promote the public understanding of science and the public's understandings of the value of science, thereby also building on social cohesion. And this webinar then will be the first of many webinars to be held this year. So we normally do them in series with each other, as well as alongside many events that we will also attend and recognize in the next year. What was very intriguing to me is when I read Professor Bruton's CV and I looked at what he has published, and the one word that really sort of trickled me and tickled me was Harambee. Harambee, the spirit of innovation. And I thought, well, let me just have a look on Mrs. Google. What does she say about Harambee? So, Prof, I hope that maybe as part of your presentation in the morning, you could clarify that. But very interestingly enough, is that the city of Ekurhuleni calls their bus service the Harambee bus. So it defines itself to say it's a safe, reliable, and affordable public transport system that will enrich the lives of the people. So that was actually quite apt for me when I read through their Facebook inscription. So it has very strong rules in terms of elderly. It says, please stand up when you see an elder or a disabled person, please give way. And it has very strong rules about COVID. It also collects information and serves you with other information as to where have you board and where are you on your way to. It has a lot of information on the tickets as well. And all the rules was quite interesting. And I could see that they have this large mission and objective is to ensure that it's a safe, reliable and affordable public transport system. So just for interest's sake, Professor Bruton, it is then my absolute privilege then to hand over to you and give you the floor. And we're really looking forward to your presentation this morning. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Susan, and also to Tsepo and Ina. It's a real privilege to participate and contribute to the Academy of Science. Right, let's move on. What I'm going to be talking about is covered in several books that I've published of late. In 2010, Introduction to Great South African Inventions. In 2016, a particular interest of mine, an aspect of indigenous knowledge, and that is the traditional fishing methods of Africa. And then in 2017, I published a comprehensive book on South African inventions. What a great idea. Covers 700 plus inventions by 350 plus innovators. And then last year, I published a series of essays in a book called Curious Notions, Reflections of an Imagineer. And it includes chapters, for instance, on who is South Africa's greatest inventor, African Nobel laureates, what is science, the funny side of science, etc. So it explores various areas of science and technology in which I've been engaged during my career. And my latest book, Harambee, which came out last week, published by the Human Sciences Research Council, is the first attempt to pull together the sort of cherry pick some of the most interesting innovations and inventions made throughout the African continent. And Harambee is a Swahili word meaning let's pull together or let's work together. And it's actually the motto of Kenya, which I regard as one of Africa's most innovative nations. Interestingly, the most innovative state in the USA, California, their motto is Eureka. So it also refers to discovery and innovation. And in this Harambee book, I look through a variety of topics, not only the normal ones that one associates with innovation, but also different aspects of creativity. And it includes several essays on, for instance, women in science and technology, the nature of entrepreneurship, and what is the nature of African innovation. Now, the distinguished economist, Klaus Schwab, who established the World Economic Forum, he's proclaimed that we are in the fourth industrial revolution. And who am I? I'm just a retired fisherman, but I disagree with him. And I think one of the hallmarks of science is the ability to form your own opinion and disagree with the opinions of the experts. He wrote a book on the subject, and in that book, he quite rightly predicted that the industrial revolution in which we are now in will be characterized by disruption, upended economies, and societal norms that will be challenged. And these words were written before the COVID pandemic, and his predictions have come true, and perhaps more than he would have expected. But I'd like to mention that it is a Western deceit that the industrial revolutions of the 19th and 20th and 21st centuries were the first that humankind produced. In fact, there were many previous industrial revolutions. Probably the most significant one is the golden age of science in Islam from 850 to about 1500, which I've studied and written on in a fair amount of detail. And it was a tremendous period of flowering of science and technology knowledge and the application of that knowledge. And I've listed just some of the fields in which Islamic scientists made major contributions. And there were also industrial revolutions in South America through the Incas and Aztecs, and also in China, India, Greece, and Rome. So, we need to put it in perspective. Our industrial revolutions in Western Europe and the Western world weren't the first. And interestingly, before Schwab made his prediction, the US military put forward a concept of VUCA in the 1990s, where looking to the future, they said society would be changing rapidly and would be characterized by volatility, in other words, rapid and unpredictable change, uncertainty with unknowable and unpredictable future trends, considerably greater complexity with many interwoven parts, and ambiguity open to different interpretation. So they anticipated a lot of what Schwab would later say. But let's go on to the conventional classification of the industrial revolutions that we recognize in the Western world. The first one, the 18th and 19th century, characterized by a move from agrarian to industrial and urban, powered by a steam engine with iron and textiles being major players. Then the second industrial revolution in the 19th century, with the availability of electricity, gas and oil, chemical syntheses, basic communication technology, mass production. The third industrial revolution with nuclear energy added to the arsenal, electronics, more advanced telecommunications, the advent of computers, synthetics. And then what Schwab calls the fourth industrial revolution, characterized by the internet, robotics, artificial intelligence, and some of the other topics that I've mentioned there. Another classification that's been proposed by Ayres and by Perez is as follows, that there was the industrial revolution from 1770 to 1800, then the age of steam and railways, followed by the age of steel, electricity, and heavy engineering, then of oil, synthetics, and mass production, and now the age of informatics. I tend to think of things in much simpler terms, and that is to cluster all the pre-industrial revolutions under one heading, the industrial revolutions on the various continents under another heading, and then to classify our current resolution as the first post-industrial revolution. Now, what we need to recognize is that those first three industrial revolutions, as defined by Schwab, generated many benefits for humankind, although few benefits for the other inhabitants of the planet. There was massive economic development, job creation, technological innovation, the development of products and services in many different fields, improved infrastructure, globalization, which to many is a two-edged sword, advanced medical care, and so on. So there were undoubtedly benefits for humankind. But we also need to recognize that those first three industrial revolutions created massive problems as well. They caused humankind to develop a very materialistic culture, which was characterized by conspicuous consumption, overpopulation, and not only of humans. We tend to forget that overpopulation of the domesticated and farm animals of humans is also a major problem, for instance, because of the way in which they contribute to greenhouse gases. And these have led to a greater level of inequality and poverty between cultures, pollution of air, sea and water, massive biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, human migrations, and increasingly natural resource shortages. So although from the scientific and industrial point of view, those industrial revolutions were great achievements of humankind, we need to recognize that they did create massive problems, and we are feeling the impact of those problems today. So the dilemma that we face in this fourth revolution is that the thinking that led us into today's problems will not lead us out of them. We need to unlearn what we learned before and overcome the cultural and economic constraints that were crafted during the industrial era using new mindsets and techniques. And anyone who followed the COP26 conference in Glasgow will have noticed how difficult our leaders are finding it to overcome the cultural and economic constraints that were formulated in previous eras in order to address the very pressing problems, especially the environmental crisis in the current era. Now, Newton famously said that what I achieved is because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. But you know, what we need to recognize, so one of the key characteristics of science is our main contributions are not so much made by standing on the shoulders of giants, but from kicking the feet out from under those giants and completely rethinking phenomena. We need to recognize that science is not about certainty, stability, and top-down authority. It's all about doubt, skepticism, questioning the status quo, and constantly attesting alternate ideas and solutions to come up with alternate answers to the same set of data. Now, I argue that we are not in the fourth industrial revolution, but in the first post-industrial revolution. And this is not just playing with the words, it's not just semantics. I believe the opportunities and challenges of the revolution that we're in now require a major change of mindset and also of behavior of humankind. I believe that this first post-industrial revolution has the capability of undoing the wrongs of those first three revolutions. And it's an opportunity to harness resources in an unprecedented way to solve global problems. So it's not the fourth industrial revolution, it's the first post-industrial revolution, totally new way of thinking and doing things, recognizing that everything will be disrupted, and it is not an incremental change. Now, one of the most influential factors in this fourth revolution is the advent of the internet, which is the most efficient communication medium ever developed by humankind. And it not only connects people, it accelerates technology take-up, but like all technologies, it also has its downside. It may deepen the digital divide and is threatened by various factors such as computer viruses, ransomware, piracy, invasions of privacy, and unsolicited emails. But we must recognize that the internet doesn't just connect us, it entangles us. And the rate at which people have participated in the internet is absolutely phenomenal, with over 4.5 billion people, more than half of all people now participating, and also a massive participation in Facebook and other online platforms. Of course, the internet also connects us to the Internet of Things. And in 2011, the Internet of Things and the Internet of People was about the same, but now in 2022, the Internet of Things has exceeded 30 billion connections. So what all of this results in is science and many other endeavors of humankind now being carried out by what may be called a multi-brained, multi-generational superorganism that has unprecedented connectivity and potentially has a collective genius and a group intelligence that can co-create not only by humans, but by all the other inhabitants of the planet. And this hyperconnectivity also has other benefits. It takes us beyond individual decisions and bias. It encourages groupthink and consensus and guards against authoritarianism. And among the digital disruptors within this fourth revolution, not only the multi-brain superorganism, but greater cross-generational collaboration. And this is perhaps where the fourth revolution differs most from the first three, which were mainly achieved by sort of middle-aged people or older people, with younger generations playing very little role. This fourth revolution is also characterized by a much more rapid flow of ideas. As a result, there are new and fruitful collaborations which didn't happen before. And instead of a few large multinational companies dominating the scene, we now have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tiny gig economies, gig companies contributing very meaningfully to this fourth revolution. We also see the return of the generalist and most importantly, contributions by millennials. And all of this is leading to new ways of doing and thinking. And it's come just in time because, as I mentioned earlier, the only way we can solve problems from the past is by thinking in new ways. So this fourth revolution is not characterized by smoke billowing from chimneys, but by gig economies, which are nimble, have a quick reaction time to new needs. And you can see some of the other characteristics in that slide on the left there. It's a completely different model of how we're going about doing things. And as I said, young people will play an important role, mainly millennials and the generational X's and Z's, who are globally connected, digitally competent, entrepreneurial, ambitious, and self-authored, self-made. They haven't necessarily gone through the normal career pipeline, and they're contributing from their teenage years onwards to innovation. Another trend we need to recognize, and this is particularly strong in Africa, is that there are two kinds of entrepreneurs. Firstly, the social, well, traditionally they were the commercial entrepreneurs who were for-profit loners. They worked in opportunity-rich environments, and their goal was to maximize their profits and basically get rich. And they tended to drive global trends in past era. But now we have an increasing number of social and environmental entrepreneurs who have a different approach to their work. They're collaborative, they tend to work in adverse environments, they often address very difficult problems, they generate social value, they plow their profits back into the enterprise, and they're often part of anti-global trends. And in my writing, I found that there's a very large proportion of social entrepreneurs and environmental entrepreneurs in Africa. Now, what is the nature of this first post-industrial revolution inventions? Well, we're moving away from tangible devices available to just a few to invisible digital services that are available to many, including apps on smartphones and cloud-based services. And these are services that serve the needs of new fields of endeavor. And they tend to reduce the impact of technology, especially on the environment. And in fact, many of them help us to measure our impact on the environment and thereby help us to create new ways of living sustainably, which is one of the biggest challenges that humankind faces at the moment. And here are some examples, and I'm sure you're all familiar with them. We're moving away from carbon-based power to distributed renewables, from internal combustion engines, arguably one of the worst inventions of humankind, together with a water flush toilet, to electric vehicles, from broadcast and print to internet and robots, capital, labor, and land as the assets that we value, to data and knowledge, big banks to smartphones, ownership to rental, post office to drone. So this represents a major shift in the way we do things. So why is this first post-industrial revolution? Well, I argue it's because of the extensive digital tools that are available to us, the connectivity that they create, the way in which they've disrupted society. Excuse me. They not only are a form of social intervention, but as we've seen with smartphones and the internet, they're a form of social domination. And importantly, for countries in the developing world, they've facilitated technology leapfrogs and the rapid spread of technology. So many countries in Africa, for instance, have leapfrogged some of those more harmful industrial revolutions and gone straight into the information era. The other major difference is it's multi-generational, with male and female contributing equally. And there are other multiple information age benefits. So to summarize some of what I've said before, this post-industrial revolution gives us a chance to drive a new, bigger and better step in human progress, to address past imbalances, adopt a less materialistic culture, and develop a more sustainable way of life. In my recent book, Harambee, The Spirit of Innovation, I look in particular at the African situation. And I argue that this is Africa's century, that we are the bright continent. There are many good indicators, more than 5% economic growth since 2000, 6 of the 10 best performing economies. And Africa is characterized by rapid technology uptake, technology leapfrogs, and a strong spirit of entrepreneurship. And there you can see Harambee on the coat of arms of Kenya. And other characteristics that I've defined through my research on African innovation is that we have a very strong spirit of entrepreneurship. But sadly, for many young people, they can't express that due to lack of opportunities and resources. We have a strong cohort of social and environmental entrepreneurs. We have many geographic advantage areas compared with the rest of the world, an extremely high cultural and natural diversity, which is going to very much be in our favor. We have a rich indigenous knowledge system, which we can draw on for wisdom. And many African people living sustainably is actually the natural way to live, which is quite in contrast to what I call the overdeveloped countries. And fortunately in Africa, we also have a number of big science projects such as Surveyor, and we have the so-called demographic dividend. In other words, the advantage of having a large number of young people on the continent. The median age of people in Africa is 19.7 years. And there you can see the median age in different parts of Africa. And most of Central and West and East Africa, the median age is in the teenage years. In North Africa and South Africa, it's in the 20s, and just a few little places where it's in the 30s. So we, from a human perspective, are a very young continent, which means there's tremendous potential that we can tap into. Now, in my writing, I've tried to define what are the characteristics of good entrepreneurship. And what I find is that many of these characteristics are shown by innovators in Africa. They have the ability to unlearn outdated ideas and relearn new concepts. They realize that adding value to an enterprise is much more important than just knowledge. They're able to organize chaos in their favor. They're capable of multitasking, living their passion. They're self-motivated problem solvers, and they retain a childlike curiosity throughout their careers. And in my Harambee book, I trace the development of many of our innovators who came from extremely difficult environments, yet succeeded on a global scale. David Attenborough, in his recent book, which is semi-autobiographical, A Life on Our Planet, has commented on the characteristics of African people as well. But let me first quote from my own book, Harambee, where I talk about the fact that young people in Africa are not afraid of experiencing failure. whereas in the Western world, experiencing failure is regarded as a major setback. So I say this is not a problem in Africa, where many, if not most, young people, especially girls, have experienced failure as well as discrimination and inequality during their short lives and learn to cope with it. In fact, failing often and quickly and getting up and starting again is a far more beneficial life lesson than nearly always succeeding. And let's look at failure, especially in relation to the two kinds of mindsets that have been defined by Dweck in his 2008 book on this topic. He said people have two kinds of mindsets. Many, in fact, most people have a fixed mindset, and they regard failure as something to avoid at all costs, as it is a measure, a negative measure of their worth. Whereas people with a growth mindset, which includes most successful entrepreneurs, they see failure not as evidence of unintelligence or lack of achievement, but as an encouraging springboard for growth and for extending one's abilities. And that's the kind of mindset one needs to have when you come from adverse environments where you're facing major problems, but you have a positive enough attitude to address those issues. So this growth mindset, these are some of the characteristics of it, and which I found extensively in my work on African entrepreneurs. People with this mindset believe that intelligence and creativity can be cultivated over a lifetime through hard work and application, directed application. These people are characterized by a passion for learning rather than a hunger for approval. And they're brave and they resourceful in that they're keen to engage with the unfamiliar and practice those things that they're not good at so that they can fill in the gaps in their skill set. And their attitude is, my true potential is unknown and is waiting to be discovered. And that's what I found in talking to entrepreneurs throughout Africa. And it's a very promising sign, because this is exactly the kind of attitude that one needs in order to take full advantage of the opportunities provided by the first post-industrial revolution. So I conclude at the end of my Harambee book that triumph over adversity by resilient, resourceful people at all levels of society, that is the nature of African innovation, and it is something worth celebrating. And then I also talk about what is the spirit of innovation in Africa. And I think a characteristic of it is it tends to be developed at all levels, from low, medium to high tech. And this is different from the developed countries of Europe and North America and parts of Asia, where they tend to focus mainly on medium to high tech. And our focus from low, medium to high tech creates what I call an innovation stepladder, which allows people growing up in adverse environments to advance to the higher level. It's characterized by determined individual, unafraid of failure. And a lot of our entrepreneurs and innovators are focusing on natural resource and social issues, which are some of the pressing issues in Africa. And they tend to have a strong problem-solving work ethic. Now, I'm just going to whip through some of the inventions and innovations that I've mentioned in my various books. And we can really be proud of the extent to which innovation has been practiced in Africa right from the very beginning of Homo habilis and through into Homo sapiens. First controlled use of fire, found by Bob Brain and his collaborators, both at Sterkfontein and Namibia over 1 million years ago. Homo habilis developing a variety of tools from wood and then from metal. The earliest known abstract artwork from Blombos Cave, found by Professor Henschelman and his team, dated at 77,000 years before present. Also the earliest known drawing, 73,000 years. Lunar stick, the oldest known mathematical device in the world, from Border Cave in northern Zululand. And then the spectacular gold plating on the golden rhino from Mapungubwe shows extraordinary innovation. And in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, these remarkable Lukasa memory boards, which the Luba people use to store knowledge. I have a particular interest in traditional fishing methods, which have been well developed in Africa. And what is remarkable is how some of them continue to be used in this modern world, such as these barricade fish traps up at Cozy Bay, the Isifonia thrust basket drives on the Pongola River, and up in Malawi, these floating villages, Zimbabwe floating villages, which people live on for part of the year to harvest fishes in Lake Chilwa and elsewhere. And here in Zanzibar, sustainable fisheries for crabs and fishes using Majake fish traps. And these are all examples of traditional, pre-colonial, pre-industrial inventions still having a place in our modern world. Some other examples of low-tech innovations that I mentioned in my book, the use of bees and beehives to repel elephants in Zambia. And now they're even using the sounds of buzzing bees and even the pheromones of bees to repel elephants. And here's an amazing example of a low-tech innovation that was very successful. Cattle farmers in northern Botswana were having problems with lions from the Harambee Game Reserve preying on their cattle. So in collaboration with a team of researchers from an Australian university, they did a research program involving over 1,800 cattle over 3 years. And about a third of the cattle had realistic eye spots painted on their rumps. 1/3 had a cross painted on their rumps, and 1/3 remained unpainted. And after 3 years, not a single one of the cattle with eye spots painted on them was predated by lions. Here's another example of a traditional method still being used today, the camel traveling libraries that are found in the Sahel in northern Kenya and across to West Africa. And of course, there are many examples, especially in South Africa, of traditional knowledge now being taken to the market in commercial enterprises. The first development of rooibos tea as a commercial product credit is given to a Russian immigrant, Benjamin Ginsberg. But in fact, he had seen the people of the Northern Cape using rooibos as infusions for healthy drinks and grooming products. So he got the idea from them originally. And kelp products have been used traditionally for a variety of purposes, but now are being beneficiated into commercial products. And the CSR, one of the many examples of their work, where they've found that Lipia japonica is extensively used by African people in the northern provinces of South Africa as a mosquito repellent. But there are 9 different chemotypes of Lipia japonica, and only 2 of them are mosquito repellent. And those have been used traditionally and now been made into candles. Another example is bittergarp, whose sap is sucked by traditional sand hunters and has now been made into a swimming product. An example from North Africa in Morocco, where hemp is now being used not as a drug, but as a building material for buildings. And here's a wonderful example of the way in which traditional knowledge has been combined with science. And Dr. Mchoni Masindi, originally from Kenya, who did a PhD at UCT, she developed the concept of etiki, which actually combines indigenous knowledge of farmers that they use to predict events and to time important agricultural events, such as the arrival of birds, migrating birds, and other natural cues. And she's combined that traditional knowledge with meteorological knowledge and made available an app that farmers can use to more accurately time various agricultural events. Here's another example, Henry Furetia in Kenya. He's developed a Save the Chicken app, which makes it possible for chicken farmers, for instance, to diagnose diseases that their chickens might have by sending a photo of the chicken or of its feces to an expert and then getting feedback. And they can also get feedback on optimal feeding regimes in different environments. And one of the great examples in South Africa of the use of modern technology to understand and appreciate the value of indigenous knowledge was made by Louis Liebenberg when he developed the Cyber Tracker, which is a farm-top computer with GPS links. And he used an icon-based keyboard to record the knowledge of sand trackers and hunters. And of course, our own Mark Shuttleworth has done wonderful work with open source software, developing the Ubuntu and other platforms that made it possible for many African people to access the internet. Another example from South Africa, the wind-up medical apparatus made by Dave Woods and his team, which makes it possible for very important medical diagnoses to be made in remote rural areas where batteries or electricity are not readily available. And then moving further afield, there are many examples of how modern technology is being used to solve environmental and other problems. Daniel Marfo has developed a zipline in Ghana, which is uses drones to not only deliver medical supplies, but also do photography of natural events. And here in Cape Town, company Aerobotics, one of the leading drone companies in the world working in the agricultural field, and they've moved from just photographing whole orchards or even individual trees to photographing individual leaves to determine the state of health of plants and what should be done about that. Another great example of an app developed by Serge Rodemeyer and his team at UCT, the Abalone Fisheries Management Act, which is used by traditional fishermen up the west coast of South Africa to record their catches, to manage the sale of fishes, and also manage the resource that they are exploiting. David Fumi of Johannesburg is founder of Blackchain, and he's developing a wide range of robotic solutions to problems that we're being faced today. Another example, Lucky Netshizati, whose parents were deaf and dumb, and he couldn't communicate with them, so he developed a talking glove that converts sign language into voice and text. And a wonderful project in Cape Town in Stellenbosch, the Solar Turtle project, using modern technology to create opportunities for people in rural areas to run small businesses without having to rely on the electricity grid. And one of our serial entrepreneurs, Mulalo Duyoyo, who's worked in South Africa as well as in the USA, although he has developed some sophisticated inventions such as the Fambeni hydrogen motorbike, he mainly focuses on the use of waste products to develop products that are useful today, such as Sinocell, which is made from waste from mining, and Amorigard, which are tiles and wall coatings. And one of our up-and-coming inventors, Sio Susi, well known as the Rocket Man, he's also moved now into nanotechnology and biotechnology to look at the ways in which our problems can be solved. And then Kerry Sink initiated the Sanvi, the SASSI system. Now she works for Sanvi, which allows consumers and restaurateurs to determine which fish may be traded, which are not threatened or endangered. And then, of course, in the space industry, South Africa has been a very important contributor, right back to our first satellite launched by Stellenbosch University, SunSat, back in 1999, which took extremely accurate photographs of planet Earth. And there have been a range of other microsatellites developed locally. And then one of the most remarkable high-tech projects in Africa that I discussed is the Internet in the Sky, balloon-suspended internet towers that are now hovering over Kenya. Kenya, especially in the Rift Valley area, which is very mountainous, has problems with cell phone reception. It's very difficult to build and operate fixed towers. So they use these Internet in the Sky balloons, which have solar panels, and they place in a geostationary orbit, an altitude of about 20 kilometers, and successfully provide internet connectivity. Now let's move on to the Anthropocene epoch. And this, I've combined this with my discussion on the first post-industrial revolution because they are coinciding, and I really believe that we need to consider them together. The previous geological era was called the Holocene, and it's part of the bigger era called the Quaternary, and that ended, that started with the end of the last Ice Age. The Anthropocene has recently been proposed by geologists as a new epoch in evolution. And some of them have proposed that it started in the 1950s. I actually think that we should put it about a century earlier than that. And the point that they have made in proposing this new epoch is that human activity, human impact on the planet is so great that it is equated to the impact of the previous extinction events, which were caused by physical calamities. And our activity is so great now that we're shaping the planet and its climate. And they note that each geological age is characterized by unique rock, fossil, and other deposits. And our Anthropocene epoch is going to be characterized by, for instance, deposits of plastic and radioactive isotopes. And to some, it's called the age of genocide because they have suggested that the way we are going now is we are actually destroying ourselves. So this is what Attenborough said about this Anthropocene epoch. We have become a global force with such power that we are affecting the entire planet. The Anthropocene, in fact, could prove to be a uniquely brief event in geological history and one that ends in the ultimate disappearance of human civilization. But he goes on to say that it doesn't have to be that way if we are prepared to change our ways and our lifestyle, but we would need to do that very quickly. And this is a summary of what we're all familiar with, that there have been mass extinction events in the past, and they have caused a massive loss of plant and animal diversity. And here I've summarized it. The first one, about 440 million years ago, 85% of species were made extinct based on the fossil record. The late Devonian, 75%, the Permian Triassic, 96% marine, 70% terrestrial, the Triassic Jurassic, 80%. The most recent one, usually known as the Cretaceous extinction event, when the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, a loss of about 75% of species. Now, although geologists have agreed that we're in the Anthropocene epoch, not all of them agreed that it can be classified as one of the great extinction events. This is something that they're still debating, and I hope that they do confirm it. But its characteristics are very simply, when is it happening? Right now. What is the cause? Human activity. And projections of the proportion of species are likely to go to extinct, 30 to 50% by 2050. But what we must remember is it's an extremely fast extinction event, counted in centuries, rather than a comparison with previous extinction events, which are counted over millions of years. So if we were to use the same time scale, our extinction event would be just as severe. So the rate of extinction is very fast, and the only solution is humans have got to undo some of their bad decisions, make better decisions in order to overcome this. So but both the cause and the solution are human activity. So then let's end by going into the environmental crisis as an example of the way in which scientific thinking and problem solving needs to change in what I call the first post-industrial revolution. And these are just for interest, in my research on the history of environmental organizations, the very first one that we can track was called the Coal Smoke Abatement Society, established in 1898, not by a scientist or technologist or policymaker, but by an English artist called Sir William Blake Richmond. And he created the society because the landscapes that he was attempting to paint, and there's an example of one, you can see the crystal clear skies, were being defaced and made almost invisible by the pall of smoke coming from the chimneys of the various industrial cities. So he started a campaign to clean up the skies of England, and that was the first environmental NGO. And of course, there were other major events which made people more sensitive to environmental issues. Rachel Carson's famous book, Silent Spring, but lesser known and equally important, her book, The Sea Around Us. The photograph by NASA of an Earthrise from the moon, which made us realize not only that we live on a very beautiful planet, but also a very fragile planet. And even more marked, in 1990, a photograph taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft from a distance of 6 billion kilometers. And there's a tiny little blue dot, and that is the planet that we inhabit. So the issue here is that humanity is at the crossroads. We are the most numerous large animals that have ever existed. Our ability to manipulate the environment is unprecedented, and we have exceeded the planet's ability to compensate for our actions. We arose from and survived through a biological process, but we are no longer part of wild nature. We are servants of our machines, trapped in unsustainable urban environments, and we are the first animal to domesticate itself and to lose its ecological place. Now, of course, that's a dangerous situation because we know that the process of evolution by natural selection has a habit of kicking out the misfits. We have evolved from hunter-gatherers who lived in a fairly sustainable way to pastoralists, shopper industrialists, to information fetishers. But what we've got to strive to be is custodians of the biosphere. We need to recognize that we are an integral part of nature as a living species, and we are a valuable species, but not a superior one in the ecological sense, and that every single living thing, every single plant and animal and microorganism has the right to struggle to live, or at least has a right to live, or at least to struggle to live. And this right is not dependent on its actual or potential use to humans. It's dependent on its role in nature. And our role is to understand and work in harmony with nature and not to conquer it. And we need to use the resilience of nature and this hyperconnectivity and the superorganism that's now been developed in the fourth post-industrial revolution to allow nature to recover. And from my research, I certainly have found that nature can be very resilient and has the ability to recover. Our work in the Okavango Delta, for instance, has shown the extraordinary ability of that system to recover from major disruptions. And another great example is how the town of Pripyat, which was where the workers at the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Russia, in the USSR rather, worked. And this is how it looks 36 years later, when nature has reclaimed a land that humankind has abandoned. So the Chernobyl recovery since 1986 has now become a nature reserve, and even the endangered Przewalski's horse has been reintroduced into that area and is thriving. So this is just one example of the resilience of nature and its ability to recover. And I see the Anthropocene as the opportunity for us to preserve what I call the Internet of living things. In other words, biodiversity. And the internet between humans and the Internet of things are two of the weapons, or rather tools, that we'll use in this fight to save the Internet of living things. I also emphasize in my writing what I call the education information value chain, that in this information age, it's not only enough for us to communicate information. Most people have access to information. We've got to convert that information into knowledge. In other words, something that's useful in the context of our lives. And now we've got to go a further step, convert that knowledge into wisdom, which allows us to make good decisions with long-term benefits. And that wisdom needs to lead us into a changed mindset, changed behavior, and then finally to influence others to change their mindset and behavior. And I argue that unless we go along that entire information value chain, we're not going to solve anything. All we're going to have is better informed people who haven't changed their lifestyles and are therefore not having any positive impact. So we can only address the challenging issues that face our world if we go through that whole value chain. So in conclusion, and to bring the various threads together, I argue that this is not just another industrial revolution. It's a hyper-connected, problem-solving post-industrial revolution. It will largely be driven by young people in developing continents working in small gig economies. And I believe that it can help us to address the challenges of this Anthropocene extinction event, which is not only threatening the extinction of species, but major disruption of essential ecological processes and life support systems on which we are dependent. And I think we should recognize that the COVID pandemic has made it quite clear that we are still part of nature and subject to her checks and balances. And despite our advanced technology and our high intelligence, a tiny little microorganism has brought our social and economic systems to its knees. And if that doesn't emphasize that we're still part of nature, I don't know what will. So we need to use the opportunities of this post-industrial revolution, take full advantage of its opportunities, and I believe that Africa has a strong role to play and is already playing a powerful role in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. This was a very powerful presentation. I have learned so much from what you had to say. We have a few questions on the chat, and I am requesting that other colleagues and participants who have questions to write them on the Q&A. My bandwidth is very small, so please forgive me for not showing my video. The question I think that we have, Prof, is from Mark van Yerden. Mr. van Yerden is asking, Prof, how does your passion for fishing influence your approach to life and its challenges?
Right, I think it's been very instructive. My wife, Carolyn, and I have spent quite a few holidays in Zanzibar, which has a strong tradition of traditional, the use of fishing methods which are sustainable. But gradually over the years, we've seen how harmful materials such as nylon gill nets and plastic traps and so on have crept into the fishery. And as a result, the resource is being over-harvested and not being harvested on a sustainable basis. So that develops a lose-lose situation. And we also have found that, the influence of middlemen who convince local people that they can make money by chopping up coral, which can be melted down to make lime and mortar. This is a short-term solution which is creating a disastrous long-term problem. Coral reefs that may be 10,000 or more years old are being chopped up to make bricks when there are many other materials that can be used to do that. So my study of traditional fishing methods has revealed just how negative the influence of some modern technologies and materials can be on attempts to live and harvest resources sustainably.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dumisani Mkazi is asking, are you working with youngsters who can take the baton and run with your work when you're no longer able to do so? What are you doing now?
Well, yeah, I try as much to work with young people. I've got two young teenagers down the road who regularly pop around to my house and we have discussions about science and technology. I give lots and lots of talks to young and old. But really it's through my books, some of which are targeted at children, others at teens and adults, that I'm trying to reach as broad a public as possible. And I've also done quite a lot of work on radio and a little bit on TV. So, I'm really open to any opportunity, anyone who'd like me to give a talk or hold a workshop or hold a discussion, I would welcome that opportunity. I was very fortunate to do a lot of field work up in Zululand and also in Okavango Delta, and there we made a special point of engaging with young people and sharing our viewpoints, but also hearing their viewpoints on the challenges that we face. And I've also been very fortunate over the years to have participated in all the national science festivals that are held in Makonda, Grahamstown. And for instance, I had an activity there called animal storytelling. And I have a menagerie of over 100 realistic animal soft toys. And I put them out on the floor and we sit around and we basically talk about them. And that has resulted in some very exciting interchanges with young people, and also them asking me some challenging questions, like why don't flowers have faces, or why don't fishes have necks, or why don't birds have babies, and so on. And I've also extended that work through my involvement in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Dubai, and also in various African countries. So I'm trying my best, but I'd welcome any invitations to be involved in other ways.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lisa Nell says, thank you for the fascinating, powerful, and accessible presentation. And Kevin Mins says, thank you, very enlightening. Dumisane said before he asked the question, I'm awestruck. And Louise says, I see your books, Harambee, and what a great idea, are both available on Takealot. So most
sorry, can I just say they're available on Loot, on Takealot, and most of them are available on Amazon or soon will be. And they can also be bought from the major bookshops. And if for any reason you have trouble getting them, please contact me. I also have copies for sale. And my email address is mikefishersbruton@gmail.com. So Mike Fishers Bruton, all one word, @gmail.com.
Prof, thank you very much. I think for me, my take home is that the Industrial Revolution happened at different times and in different ways in the different geographical locations. As a result, we can't have one that informs all the industrial revolutions. And therefore, your argument for me, I think I'm convinced that this could be the first post-industrial revolution. So it would be important, I think, to consider the 25th of May, the Africa Day, to have a conversation with you. But I think this is not the right place to try and get you on board on that. I will consider talking to my principals, because I think we need different ways to talk about what we are doing as a continent, and also how to celebrate all the discoveries and also the good work that is done in the continent. Colleagues, do I have any more questions? I'm looking at the chats. I would like to know why flowers have no faces. Or when Kosi Nyao asks.
Well, maybe we should put it another way. Why do animals have faces? Well, the reason, of course, is that they've got to put their sense organs somewhere, and it makes sense for them to be all in one place looking forward, so that they can detect predators and find food. So we tend to cluster our sense organs, or on our faces for those reasons. That's not to say that plants don't have sense organs, but they don't necessarily have to be clustered all in one place.
Wonderful, wonderful. Prof, I don't think we have many questions. it was a very powerful presentation, and we are going to be keeping this on our YouTube for people who are unable to join us today, so that they can be able to access it. But I'm going to ask everybody who is in attendance today to expect a link where they are just going to evaluate and tell us what their thoughts are with regards to the presentation, and maybe we will share those with you so that you know exactly what people thought about the presentation. Is Susan available just for concluding thoughts?
Thank you very much, Tsepo. Professor Bruton, I'm absolutely covered in goosebumps. I'm absolutely fascinated by how you actually integrated the Industrial Revolution and its different forms thereof with innovation as such. And I think that is what we're lacking, not only in our school systems, but also generally in our publics that we deal with, is just to understand this concept and to see how interwoven they are with each other. It is really just mind-blowing to see how the one thing actually leads to the other thing, to the other thing. And I just love the way in how you sort of concluded to look at the extinction of many live organisms, etc., which is a real problem. And the way you concluded to say that that humans, although they are the biggest cause of all these problems, that they will have to solve these problems by themselves. And I think this is really a call and on not only webinar participants, but I think to us as the public, to actually listen very carefully as to what is happening right here. And I do agree that I think that we have to spread this message in the way that you have done. Thank you. This has been very fascinating. And again, we are focusing within the Academy of Sciences this year specifically on Indigenous knowledge systems. This really places the whole thing of science and how it can be practiced and how it can benefit society in a whole Indigenous traditional knowledge framework. So that is great. But lastly, but not least, is I really admire your love that you have for your continent, for Africa as a whole. That is quite amazing, because we live in such a changing world where things go horribly wrong, and we'd rather hate our country, and we'd rather hate a lot of things, and that we forget actually in what remarkable continent we do live, and the potential and the growth potential that sits within its people. So thank you very much for reminding us that we do live in a remarkable continent, and that each of us have a big role to play to upliftment and to take everything forward which has already been produced through the inhabitants of this continent. So thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, Tsepo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. For the students, learners who are joining us from the different high schools, please try and look at how this can be linked to your life sciences. I think it's Learning Outcome 4, where you look at the human impact on the environment. So please look at that, because I think that what Prof was talking about could be linked to your curriculum in one way or the other, particularly with regards to the last part where he was talking about Anthropocene extinction. Please ask your teacher, and also do Google yourself to look at this information and how it links to what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. It was a wonderful webinar, Prof. We are grateful. Please expect a link, and we are also going to be sharing the video on YouTube so that everybody who is here and who wants to share it with other people can be able to do that. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Prof. Thank you.